Hey, what's up, everybody? Mark MacKinnon here. Thanks for tuning in to the fifth and final part of my video series about the top 5 things I love about Dyskami Publishing's Absolute Power superhero role-playing game. Today is number 1, and this is the fact that we've set Absolute Power and the Sentinel Earth universe, we've set it within the confines of our real world. And this is something that's a little complex, and it's much more difficult to do than creating our own universe and our own setting and putting a box around it. By trying to take real world events and integrate it with what we're doing in Absolute Power, that's a challenge that it's actually my favorite part about the game, because it is so complex and difficult to do, and it pushes us as writers, as game designers, in order to touch upon the real world events with respect, with compassion, to make sure that we don't attribute what happens in the real world just to things that our supervillains are doing, for example. And so when we look at some of the real world events that we've had to integrate with the superheroes, what we can't do is just have the superheroes come in and make it all better. We can't have the villains behind every plot. And this is something that it's walking a fine line between something that's realistic and plausible versus something that doesn't take away the agency of humans that go through these real world events. And so when we're doing historical events, when we're covering what happened during World War I and World War II, that was really quite simple to do because it was so long in the past, and with hindsight, it's very easy to write things in there. But when we're starting touching about things that are a little bit more recent, whether it's what happened with the World Trade Center 20 years ago, or what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening with COVID. These are things that, because we're setting up the Sentinel Earth universe to run in parallel with what happens in the real world, but we have to address what's happening while not overwhelming it with superhero explanations. And so often the challenge with that is taking the superheroes and supervillains and giving them an important role on the side that indicates that they were involved in events but not primary movers and shakers, whether that's the January 6th at Capitol Hill, or maybe what's going on with some of the natural disasters around the world. Like, why wouldn't the heroes stop the natural disasters or be the ones doing all the cleanup? Why wouldn't the people in, for example, Washington, D.C., come in and stop the January 6th incursion? Well, we have to come up with explanations that are feasible and plausible with all of these. And this stretches what we can do with a setting. It also allows us to focus on the characters and give the agency to the GMs and the players, because they lived through those real world events, whether it was 1 year ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that they understand what has happened, and yet the characters can integrate in the way that they feel sees fit. And so it allows us to unlock the potential for players and GMs by focusing on the characters and not creating an entire separate world with a separate set of laws, for example, and science and technology. We don't have to explain everything that we would with a fantasy game or a science fiction game or most superhero role-playing games. The complexities and the difficulties that this poses to do it and do it well and do it right and be sensitive about it, this is what makes Absolute Power stand out from all of the superhero role-playing games, that they don't embrace this concept because it is a challenging concept to do. It reminds me of back whenever, of course, 9/11 happened, the comic book publishers Marvel and DC, they had to address that in some way. And there is the famous black Spider-Man cover of Spider-Man dealing with the aftermath of the World Trade Center's disaster. And that was a very difficult thing to do, and that inspired our team to raise the bar of what could be done with superhero role-playing game design and setting design. And so that is my number one favorite thing about Absolute Power, is how we've set up the setting for Sentinel Earth to run in parallel with a superhero bend to it. And I think we do a spectacular job. Robin, the creative designer, nails it in many ways, and it is something that I'm most proud of that we do with Absolute Power. So thank you so much for watching this series. I hope you have a chance to go through all 5 videos about what I, as the game designer of Absolute Power, just love about the game. So thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again.